Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelly Munn, and I'm with the League of Education Voters. Welcome to our free online webinar series called Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series close to 4 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's LEVinar is about co-designing family engagement. LEV's work is to ensure every student, especially children of color in Washington State, is college and career ready, and it cannot be done without the involvement of families and community. Today, we have the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition Executive Director, Erin Okuno, sharing best practices on how to engage caregivers and communities of color, and will answer your questions. Erin Okuno is the Executive Director of the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, often called CSEC. This is a coalition of community-based organizations that include schools, educators, community leaders, parents, and caregivers, and concerned Southeast Seattle residents working to improve education for all children, especially those in Southeast Seattle and those furthest away from opportunity. Prior to joining CSEC, Erin worked on K-12 and early learning education policy, supporting public libraries and developing education coalitions. Through these experiences, she developed a deep interest in racial equity, which prepared her to lead CSEC. Erin has also served as co-chair of the Mayor's Preschool Program and Implementation Plan, and was a member of the Mayor's Education Summit Task Force and OSPI's Race and Ethnicity Student Data Task Force, and is a co-creator of the Fake Equity concept and writer for the fakeequity.com blog. Erin is also a Seattle Public School parent and former preschool program parent. She and her family reside in South Seattle. On the side, she enjoys borrowing way too many books from the library and fretting over not finishing them on time, checking out South Seattle's delicious eats, and mastering the art of jam making. Erin graduated from Seattle U with an MPA. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. You'll notice a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to pose questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the Q&A function or at info@educationvoters.org. With that, I'd like to welcome Erin Okuno.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to be with you today and to share some work that CSEC did on engaging families, specifically around using a survey tool to do this. So let's get started. So I think you should be able to see on your screen a really pretty wheel graphic, very colorful. And this was developed by Annie Shimaru and Joel Lott at the UW College of Education. And this was the format that we used to develop our survey project. And the survey project was meant to help us find out and learn more and engage with our community to find out what was happening in Southeast Seattle around education. So, and we did this a couple of years ago, but the process is really interesting and one that I think that I'm hoping you'll learn a little bit about and find out what questions you have, because all of that also helps us figure out what to do next. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions along the way. So on this wheel, you'll see a lot of colorful parts, and we'll start with the red. So what we did was we asked a couple of big questions. And one of the questions our coalition partners gave to us early on was they were interested and curious and wanted CSEC to prioritize family engagement. And when I heard that, I cried. I wanted to cry even bigger because as a coalition that has a staff of, at the time we had like 2 people with an intern. So we had 3 on staff and we're like, how are we supposed to do community engagement for in a quality way that's going to bring meaningful results? And thankfully, a partner from UW stepped forward and said, hey, we just piloted this new way, this family engagement survey. What do you think? And we also had community partners at that time that stepped up and said, this sounds like a really great tool. We'd love to partner with you on it. So the first question was like, family engagement, what to do with it? And then the second question was, well, can we do this and who should join us? So with the who part, we gathered a small team of design partners, including Chinese Information Service Center, a couple of schools, powerful schools, and one or two others. And from that group, they helped us prioritize what questions should go into the survey that we put together. UW was great. They brought us some sample surveys, and then our team really dug into it, and we tore apart the questions, rewrote questions, thought about what the questions, what did we want to learn, what was important, what were the values of CSEC, what were the values we hold in Southeast. And then we also asked ourselves some more practical questions like, how does the term family engagement, or how do some of the questions get interpreted into multiple languages that would make sense for those communities? So that was the first part. Then we moved to prioritization, and in that prioritization, we really thought about what data and processes should we use. So a little bit of that was what questions, which was a bleed over from the first phase, but also what prioritizing really, how do we want to run this? What's important? What are the values that we really need to ask ourselves? This was a really values-driven survey process. We spent a lot of time in the red and orange phases thinking about values, what was the sense of community that we wanted to build. And in that, we paused and asked and landed on anything we did, we had to prioritize trust building. So I can't think of how many times I've received a survey over email and go, oh, great, just another survey. We didn't want to convey that. We wanted this process to also build trust within the Southeast community. We wanted to build trust between people, between organizations. So we use that as a guiding value in the questions we asked in the way that we conducted the survey, which really informed the engagement phase, the yellow part. So instead of just putting together a paper survey and sending it out, or putting it on the web, both of which we did, we really worked with our design partners to say, what is going to build trust with people that you're reaching out to? How is this going to be a trust? How should we move forward with it? And in this phase, we allowed our partners to really have the survey done in culturally appropriate ways and ways that would build trust within their communities. So in one group that we worked with, they really, they held a lot of focus groups, and the parents talked amongst themselves to discuss the questions. We also, in another group, they did one-on-one interviews, and they did a lot of storytelling to collect the surveys. In a couple of the schools, they did a little bit more of the traditional backpack mail, but that was because that was right for their community. So in the engagement phase, there was a lot of different ways that it happened, and that was really, we saw the personalities of the group come out, which was really fun. Making sense was the data was collected, we synthesized it, and then we had to make sense of it. So this is a little bit of where we took it back out to the community, which we continue to do today, to say, what does this data mean to you? What does it mean to the communities that took part of it? And to tease out different stories from that as well. And then from that, we have 5 and 6, the blue and purple, which we're still in. So what are the strategies that came out of the data, and how do we act upon it to make change? And you'll see that's a wheel, because this is an iterative process. So at some point, we'll probably go back out to the community with another survey, but probably not in the exact same way, because we learned a lot from it and learned some things that we want to do differently for the next go round. So I'm going to really quickly run through some of our results that to share with you what we found. So in this on this slide, you'll see kind of the demographics of who took part in our survey. 76% of the people were self-identified people of color. That was huge. 65% of the respondents said their families qualified for free and reduced lunch. Immigration status, 62. And home language, 62% do not speak English. So I've seen survey results from public school districts, and I do not think that I think we reached a different population. And I'm really proud of this, and it also shows that the design work we did early on to bring partners to the table helped to drive this result. So one of the points I want you to walk away with is how you design for racial equity, how you design your processes really shows up on the back end when you have your final results. In this one, you'll see some of the languages that we had it translated into. 639 families took part in it. 51% took it in a language other than English. And interestingly, 77% of respondents came through on paper. And that's an important part to think about as we move to much more internet and email ways of engaging with families for things like surveys. So this last slide is, or it's not the last one, but on this slide, one of the ways that we were really intentional about framing the results. So our design table, our design group really was very clear with us that we didn't want this process to pit communities against each other. It had to build a trust again. And so when we started to collect the data, we started to synthesize it. John Doe Chen was our partner from the University of Washington. You know, he kind of sat with this and let it rumble around with him for a little while. And he landed on this framework that is quite interesting and a nice way to think of it. So instead of saying people of color or whites, or you know, using language that is pejorative, we landed on dominant and majority. So I'm going to start with majority. Majority is people of color, families qualified for free or reduced lunch, immigration status, primary non-English speaking. We also think about it as being in a position of democratic potential and possibility, more specifically transforming educational practices, policies, and research to support historically oppressed and overlooked social groups. It was also the majority of our respondents and the majority of people who lived in Southeast Seattle. So that's majority. On the other side, we have dominant, as in dominant culture, and dominant culture of where we live in this society. So white, qualified full price lunch, which is often a proxy for poverty in the K-12 education setting. Non-immigrant, primarily English speaking. And we think of this as really the public school system caters to and is designed for dominant culture. So all of the many of the texts are in English. That's not what we found in our majority of survey respondents. Many times, again, we're not trying to set this up as an either or. It was meant to also just acknowledge the political reality of how many of our families are living. And also that many of the dominant families can think about how they support majority families. There's ways to act and to change and to advocate where we can come together more holistically as a community. So the reason I'm sharing this is how we framed all of the rest of our surveys when we went out into the community. So one of the results that I'll share with you is how families like to receive information. And this is out of all of those slides that we shared, this is the one that is one of the most interesting ones and one of the easiest to understand really, really quickly. So what you'll see is how families like to receive information. On the far left is a bar showing family email, then it goes flyers, in-person, and phone calls. Dominant families prefer email. And I think we also have an public education systems across the state probably also cater towards email because it's cost efficient, it's quick, it's easy, and it's a way to get information out. However, if you look towards the right, you'll see majority families, the green bars, say that they prefer in-person and phone calls. And so that's an important thing to note for how families want to receive information, specifically families of color. And this slide is also interesting because this is, if we slow down and really think about it, this is how systemic racism and institutional racism shows up if we continue to just use one way to communicate with families. So I think I will pause there for questions. I'm looking at my host.
Thank you, Erin. We have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Folks who are listening, please type your questions in the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. And please don't hesitate because you think your question is too basic. It's not. I guarantee you that the question you ask, others have. So please take a few moments to type a question into the bottom of the screen. And then in the meantime, while we're gathering questions, I have a question. So who have you done this presentation to? Who's learning from this information?
That's a great question. So we've shared, we've done this presentation back out with the design partners. So I mentioned Chinese Information Service Center was one of them. We took it back out to many of the parents that participated, and they really enjoyed seeing their data come alive. It also brought up a lot of stories about the things that they want to see changed in the education system. And the really fun thing is also been working with them, with those families, to figure out how they can leverage their voice to ask for change.
Thank you. After you surveyed people in your community, did you engage them in other ways?
We did. So I think really CISC was one of them. We also did a huge community summit where we took all the data back out and invited anyone from the Southeast community and actually beyond to come hear the presentation. That was part of our commitment and my continued commitment to the survey respondents, that it wouldn't just sit on a shelf. We also shared it with Seattle Public Schools. We've shared it with schools itself. So both at the systems level, at the school district level, and all the way down to the community. It's also available on our website because I see the value, and we wanted to make sure that the data is actually used.
Thank you. How long did it take you to go through the cycle of the 6 steps?
Great question. So we allotted ourselves about a 6-month process. And it was the nice thing about having this process to go through was we really tried not to get stuck on any one phase. So we spent about probably 2 meetings on the early stages. The design group kind of slowed down during the engagement phase because that's when everybody was out doing actual survey collection. And then we're still kind of in the blue and purple where we're making sense of the data and also continuing to act on it.
Thank you again. Remember to type in your questions at the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And we welcome all questions. In the meantime, I have another question. You had implicated or implied that there would be changes to how you did this. What were some of the lessons that you learned during the process?
So some of what we learned was some of our blind spots as we were putting together our design team. And one of the, such as one of the groups that we missed is we kind of missed some of the older grades. So our design group was really heavily stacked with elementary school and made a little, I'm not sure if we had early learning. So we kind of missed the early learning as well as a middle and high school. So we learn.
Yeah.
We move forward.
That's the point, right? Again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in on the Q&A feature. I've got a couple of questions coming. Let's see. How has the Seattle School District reacted to your data?
I think the Seattle School District, for many of the people that we shared it with, have appreciated the data. They really, there's certain parts that resonate really well. The slide that I shared with you about how families like to receive information really resonated. So interestingly, the year we did it was the year that Seattle Public Schools stopped doing a lot of robocalls because of FCC ruling. So we could definitely see how that was impacting the data, and having this data was a really great way for them, for internal work to reevaluate should they go back to robocalls, should they do things one of the neat stories that we heard later was we shared this data back with an elementary school principal and his staff. And so one of the, this principal in particular was like, wow, if nobody likes flyers and email is not the preferred method of communication for our majority families, again, families of color, he's like, why am I having my bilingual IAs spend hours, an hour or two each week translating a document into written form? What if I take that same time resource and people resource and ask them to take a slate of about 10 families each and spend 10 minutes building a relationship with that family with either a phone call or an in-person relationship to share the same information. And so that was a really interesting and neat way to think about it, to say, wow, data really drove this, and maybe we'll see better results overall. And in the next survey round, I wonder what's going to be different in the way trust was built and how that value of trust continues to be moved forward.
Fantastic. Will the slide deck be shared? I would like to share it with my networks. We will share it. Lev will post it on our website by end of day tomorrow, likely today. And Erin is nodding her head in agreement that please share widely. This is a useful tool for communities all across the state who are listening to understand that this data probably reflects their community, and this method of research is important for us to all learn from. Please, again, please type in your questions. We have about 6 more minutes of time, and can take more questions from you. And I'm sure that you have more questions around the process itself.
How about if I read it? That might be easier.
Okay.
Okay. For organizations with limited staff resources, do you have any folks to recommend we could work with in collaboration or a subcontract?
Oh, great question. So if you go to University of Washington's website, College of Education, and I believe the process document itself is under Family Design Leadership Collaborative, FLDC, or if you Google Ann Ishimaru or Joe Lott's name, it's there. Actually, it's very tiny, tiny text underneath the wheel graphic. So look for that when it gets sent out by Lev. I think there's one of the nice things about this process is you can really adapt it as well. It's the basic principle. The main basic principle is the more you involve your community and the more that you invite them in, that drives the results. So it doesn't have to be exactly how I've laid it out, but if you kind of hold that core belief, you'll see different results in the back end. CSEC has used this process in other ways on other projects, and I've learned a lot about just how to include more people and how to design better processes that drives that more racial equity.
Well, we're waiting for some more questions to come in. I have another question, and that is, I think many of the people listening on the phone know who CSEC is, but for those who don't, would you talk a little bit about your organization and what you're most proud of? Clearly, we're proud of this work. Is there other things that you've done that you're most proud of?
So CSEC is a community coalition based in Southeast Seattle, an area of Seattle that has incredible gifts and is rich in diversity. We also have a really rich and really great food. I like food, so I use it. I talk about it a lot. And I think, as an organization, we try to bring the community together, diverse communities, to have common conversations around education, highlight what's working, where we need to come together to fix problems. So that's a really, really short answer to that complex question.
Yeah. And projects that you're
proud of. I think the overall thing that we're most proud of isn't a project, but it's the way we come together. So we're very explicit about talking about race. We're very explicit about trying to work together to impact education systems. We also, in the way we talk about race, is we borrow the Color Brave Space format, which was developed by the consulting firm Equity Matters. If you Google Color Brave Space, it will come up and you'll see that. And if you are ever interested in coming to visit one of our coalition meetings, please reach out. They're open to the community, and we have some fascinating conversations.
Thank you. This question is a great follow-up to the last one. How has the community input affected CSEC strategic planning and priorities?
That's a great one. So I think part of it is we now try to work to design more holistically. So that's not the results, but the process itself was so important to go through and trying to bring forward community voice. That it's impacted the way we continue to think about our engagement, or the way we move forward. So what was the second part?
And the process. And the priorities, excuse me.
As for priorities, the family engagement, what this highlighted for us was the family engagement work. We've also, some of the results have bled into, have informed our next round of work. So currently we're working, we're doing a speaker series, and so many of the results from the survey itself have driven towards like, what do we want to do next and how are we working around it? For strategic planning, I think we just saw the value of it, and we're continuing to work on our strategic plan. So don't have a super solid answer there.
Thank you. After CSEC receives input from the community, how do you take action? Do you focus on passing policy in Southeast Seattle area school districts?
So in this case, there's a twofold answer. One, CSEC doesn't own this data. It's community-held data. We were simply the backbone that helps to bring it forward. So I feel, so CSEC itself has this, sharing it on this call, sharing it with others was part of our commitment. So I hope that communities have chosen to take action on it. I think I shared one example where one school did. I know of many other examples as well. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to delve too deeply in that part. As for the policy stuff, we've worked with individuals, we've worked with some of the data and shared it back out with Seattle Public Schools to say, this is your data too, and how can we work together, and how can we help you hear from different community partners that were part of the survey to change practices. So one of the ways is reinstituting robocalls, so that, and because phone calls are important. We've also tried to impress upon Seattle Public Schools headquarters or central office and school leadership that relationship building is really, really important. And we've seen, I've heard of little stories here and there to hear how that's been driven a lot more deeply into the systems of schools.
Thank you. One last reminder that you can type in a question in the Q&A feature in the bottom of your screen. We have room for we've got one coming in and another one, probably one more after that, and then we will likely wrap up. Since you did the survey, how has your relationship with the community changed?
Oh, that's a great one. I think our relationship with the community has become deeper. I've enjoyed the process. I've gotten to know a lot of parents through this work, and then some of the subsequent work where we're fortunate to be invited in to do deeper work with specific communities. So as an example, we worked, Chinese Information Service Center invited us in to share the results. And the parents got really fired up about a number of things from the survey. And so we worked with them over 3 additional design sessions to come up with some asks that they wanted, such as they want more bilingual instructional aids. They wanted, there was a couple others, very specific things that they said, this is important to our kids, this is important to our kids' education. But more importantly, we slowed down and use some of the data to jumpstart a conversation about what were their dreams for their students. And some of them were heartbreaking. Some of the parents said, like, wow, we immigrated here because we see the potential of education, and it's really hard to keep and hold that dream when we're fighting for things like quality translation, where we can't attend, or when we attend, we're invited to like an after-school event. We go, but we can't really participate because we don't there's no interpreters there. So that's some of like the stories that the survey data allowed them to feel to say like, wow, I have the data now. I understand that what I'm feeling is not isolated. It's much broader. So that's a privilege that I had to get to know those families, to hear those dreams, to hear those hopes, and hear the struggles. And now I've gotten to know some of the families as well. It was also important for me personally because in doing this work where I have the privilege of working across communities of color, I also personally recognize that I spend a lot of time in English-speaking communities, which is easy to do because we operate in an English-speaking education system. But through this process, I slowed myself down to also recognize, wow, I'm missing out from a huge portion of the community as well. And so that was a personal reflection I had that this survey allowed me to reflect on. And now when I'm out, I see a lot of parents, they wave at me and it's really fun. And then they try to speak to me in Chinese. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying other than hello, ni hao. But it's been really great. And I need to practice my language skills.
Thank you, Erin. It is so refreshing to talk with someone who shares their learnings and their growth themselves. As a member of that dominant population who is often working with the majority population, your work is incredibly helpful on my own personal journey and the League of Education Voters journey. So I'm going to put a plug in for the Fake Equity blog. It is phenomenal. If you haven't read it, and Erin posts every once in a while to it. So I want to thank everybody today for joining us. If you have any additional questions or comments, please send them to me at kelly@educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website. And please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. And thank you again for attending. We hope you will join us in future webinars.